We're going to take a look at the flat glass tab. The flat glass tab allows you to search up your flat glass parts that are in your system. Unlike auto glass, there isn't a database of flat glass parts that you can use, so those parts have to be added into your system. Now there is a set of parts already in the system, but at the very least you're going to need to go in and edit those parts for pricing purposes, and then there's probably quite a few parts that you'll need to add into the system that aren't already there. So if you haven't watched the tutorials on setting up parts, you'll want to do that. In order to get started, we're on the flat glass tab. We need to search for the part and add it, so we're on the Add Item tab. Now in order to add an item, we're going to need to select a category. So we'll click on our drop-down menu there and choose Annealed. At this point, you'll notice there are a couple of properties lists there, thickness, color. Now we don't need to pick any properties. We can just leave those as is, and we could hit search. And now it's going to search up all of the parts that we have in our annealed category. Now that can be quite a list. So if we've set up our parts using the property lists, we can narrow our search by picking some of the properties. So if we were to go into thickness and choose 1/4 inch and now search again, you can see we've narrowed our list down considerably down to 5 parts. And if we were to take it a step further and look for just 1/4 inch clear and do a search, now we've narrowed it down to just 2 parts. So it makes things a lot simpler if you use the properties, and you can narrow your search from there. Also, when we do a search, we can search using either a description or a manufacturer's part number. So we'll go ahead and reset these back to any. And now let's look for any parts in our annealed category where the word plate is in the description. And we find parts that way. Another way is when you set up a part, you can put in a manufacturer's part number. So if we have a manufacturer's part number, we can search by that. And we pull that up. Now the box below the manufacturer's part number, that's our description. So when we set up the part, there is a place where we can add in a description. So if we've added in anything in that description, we would see that in that box below. Also, if you take your arrow and roll over the part, any notes that or description that is on that part would show up as well. Okay, let's go back, and this time let's look for a different part. Take out our manufacturer's part number here and do another search. And now you can see this one, we have a couple parts here, and some of the parts have a plus sign next to them. Now that plus sign means that there are related parts. So again, when you set up your original part, there's a tab to set up related parts. So these would be parts that go with this part when we're selling it. And those parts can be set up as either optional or required. Optional meaning that we can just add them if we need them. Required means that when we sell this part, it's automatically going to add the part. So if we go ahead and click on the plus sign here to expand it, you can see that the first part is black, and then the second part is in red, and the red would indicate that it is a required part. And again, if we just roll over the part, we get a little note that pops up, and sometimes it can be a little finicky when you roll over it, but it does show there that it's a required item. So again, when I mark this part to be added to the ticket, it's going to automatically add that second part, whereas if I want to add the first part on the list, I'd have to add that separately. So how do we add the part to the ticket? Well, there are a couple different ways that we can do it. Whatever part is highlighted in the list, if we go down to the bottom and click on the Add Item, it will add that item. You'll notice that it immediately went to the Dimensions tab because the part that I added does have dimensions that are required to be able to price that part. And it also added the second part, that related part that we noted was required. Now if I wanted to remove a particular part from the ticket, I could do the same thing, except kind of in reverse order. Down here, if I click on a particular part so that it's selected, you'll notice the little black arrow next to the part number shows it's selected. I can choose the Remove Item button. Also, up at the very top of the program, there is a Delete Item icon. I can click on the Delete item to remove it. The other way to add a part to the ticket would be to go here next to the part number in the little checkbox and check that part. And as soon as I put the check mark in there, it adds it to the ticket. And again, the same thing, if I uncheck it, it would remove it from the ticket. All right, we'll go ahead and just add that part back on here for a moment. And let's talk about the item number. You can see in the items section there next to each part number in the left-hand column there is an item number. And we've got an item 1.01 and an item 1.02. Because they both are 1 point something, that means that those items are linked together, that the second item is a sub-item of the first item. And what that does for you is when you're printing out your tickets, it will put all of those parts together and price them as one part, as opposed to pricing each part individually. Although it will show all the parts on the ticket, it will price them as one. Now you may not want a particular part grouped with another part, and other times you do. So there is options in here. If I go to the part number and right mouse click it, I can choose to ungroup the item, and now it makes it a separate item. And I can conversely right mouse click and group it to an item. So if there were multiple items on this ticket, it would have an option to group to each and every one of those, and I could pick which one I want to group it to. Also, if I'm going to add another part to this ticket, before I add the part, I can go here to add a sub-item, and now if I add a second part, when it puts it on, it automatically groups it to the item that's already on there. So it automatically makes it item 1.03. There are a couple other options in the right mouse click there. If we go back to this first item here, you can see there's an option for edit dimensions. So if we weren't already on the dimensions tab, we could choose the edit dimensions and it would put us on the dimensioning tab. Also, we've got our related parts option here where we can click on it and it brings up a list of our related parts, and we can check and uncheck the related parts there. Lastly, you'll notice in the Add Item section here, we have a bunch of different columns here. It's similar to the auto glass. We've got our part number, our description, and the totals. But unlike the auto glass, because most of our flat glass parts rely on dimensions, you won't normally have a total or pricing in there, because until you've added dimensions, it really can't give you any pricing. Now you can also add parts to your ticket without going through the flat glass tab. To be able to do that, you can just simply click into the part number field. Now if you know the specific part number that you want to add to the ticket, you would just simply type in that particular part number and then hit enter, and it's added the part onto the ticket. Now, oftentimes with flat glass parts, you have so many different parts, it's hard to remember all the part numbers. So you may remember part of the part number. So another thing that you can do is if you type in the first part of the part number and then an asterisk, and then hit the enter key, you'll get a list of all the parts that start with whatever you've typed in. In our case, we've typed in ANE. Now it assumes, because the asterisks at the end, that those first three letters that we typed were the very beginning of the part number. So you may not always know for sure if that part of the part number is actually at the very beginning. So what we can do in that instance is we can do an asterisk and then part of the part number. This time let's look for something that's 1/4 inch and add another asterisk at the end. And that's known as a wildcard search. And that's going to look for 1/4 anywhere in the part number. Now when I hit enter, you can see that along with a bunch of ANE parts, I've got an ART, and as I scroll down the list, there are plenty of other parts that are showing up in my list now where 1/4 is somewhere in the part number. So that's another way that you can look up your parts. So between that and your Add Items section on your flat glass tab, you should be able to look up any part that's in your system. Also remember that if a part isn't already in your system, but you need to create the ticket at that time and don't have time to add the part number in, you can put in a part number, and when you hit enter, if it doesn't find the part in your file, it's going to ask you if you're adding the item manually, and you can choose yes to manually add the item. Now, of course, if you do add a part in manually, it's not going to allow you to add dimensions in, so you'll just have to perhaps add that into the description if there are dimensions required, and then manually calculate the pricing and put the pricing in on that particular part. You'll want to make sure to watch the second half of our flat glass tutorial session on dimensions.